already 10 days into March. That means Canadians, you only have 18 more days to get your Conservative Party memberships, have your say on the next leader, and hopefully the next Prime Minister of Canada. And with that, I'm very pleased to be joined now with Andrew Saxton, former Member of Parliament for North Vancouver and Parliamentary Secretary under the late, great Jim Flaherty, the Finance Minister. Andrew, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
Chris, it's great to be here, and we're doing well. We've been traveling across the country for the last 5 months, and in fact, we just got back yesterday from back east, and we're heading out again tonight. So it's a busy schedule. You don't appreciate how big this country is until you take on a national task like this.
I'm sure. I mean, I can't imagine how many flights and overnight trips you've done so far. Anyway, what I've tried to focus on in my interviews with the various leadership candidates, it's 14 deep, as you know, the field, what kind of differentiates you from the others. And one thing that I saw on your website was a real, a written plan how to get this country back to balance. We know Trudeau got the deficits run up to $35 billion a year after he said it was only going to be 10. You wrote it down. What is the key, you think, to getting your plan executed should you become the leader 2019?
Okay, well, over the last 5 months, I've been traveling across the country, meeting with Canadians, and they're telling me the same thing over and over again. They're worried about their jobs, they're worried about the economy, and they're worried about the debt and the deficit. And I think that, right now, Finance Canada predicts $1.5 trillion in debt by 2045. We're calling this Trudeau's trillions, and I think that's the number one issue facing Canadians today, is to get that deficit and debt in order. It's not fair to future generations to mortgage their future. So as my number one goal as the Prime Minister in 2019, I'm going to balance the budget within 2 years. And I'm the only candidate, leadership candidate today, who has actually put pen to paper and has come up with a plan. And it's on my website, andrewsaxton.ca, and that's my plan right there. The highlights of the plan, first of all, I'm going to get rid of the banking of sick days for public servants. Why should those be treated as an entitlement? Either you're sick or you're not. And what's been happening is that public servants have been banking these sick days. So some of them have 2 years worth of sick days. And so when they start to retire, they then retire 2 years early and get fully paid out as a result of that. Where in the private sector does that exist? It doesn't. And it's on the books right now at $1 billion and $100 million a year. So that's the first thing I would do, is I would get rid of that. We tried to do it under the Conservative government previously. We were getting progress on it, and then the Liberals came in and they caved into the unions, and now this has been put off the table, so they can continue to have these sick days. In addition to that, I would also change the mandate of the CBC. The original mandate of the CBC was to promote Canadian culture and language, which is good, and I would keep them for doing that. I think that Radio Canada does a great job of promoting the French language, especially to Canadians outside of Quebec. We will keep that. We will keep the services to the northern communities where CBC is the only service. But why should we be funding the CBC to the amount of $1.2 billion a year so they can compete with private enterprise who doesn't get those subsidies? It's totally unfair. So that's $400 million that we would save by putting the mandate of the CBC back to where it should be. And one final thing that I want to highlight as well is that I'm going to convert the $5 bill into a coin, and I'm going to get rid of the nickel, and that will save $100 million a year.
That's a great idea. Actually, I think we're becoming an increasingly cashless society. I think that's something we should definitely consider by 2019, if not sooner. Anything as far as tax reform, I apologize if this is not in your bill, but something that comes off the top of my head that you guys wanted to do in the last government was change the retirement age to 67, and the Liberals also caved in on that pressure, put it back to 65. Anything along those lines, or some tax reform that you have in mind by 2019?
Well, first of all, it makes perfect sense that you would extend that age. Every other country just about has done it. People are living longer. Back in the days when the CPP was first introduced, and the OAS, I should say, the OAS was first introduced, people, the average life expectancy was 72 to 74 years. It's 10 years longer now, which is great news. I mean, Canadians are living now well into their 80s, and many are even living into their 90s. But that's a huge strain on the public purse when they're starting to collect at 65. For the first time ever, some people are actually spending more time in retirement than they did working. So we have to look at the future. And we've got the baby boom generation that is retiring. That's a huge population, and it's going to be a big drain on the economy. So we have to look at measures of making sure that our tax system and our services are sustainable. So that's one of the things. I think we also need to reduce the number of tax brackets. The Trudeau government has increased the tax brackets to 5 right now. I think that's too many. I would cut it back to probably 3 or even 2. There's a problem when it takes more brains to figure out your tax return than it does to make the money. And that's the situation that we're in right now. Now, the other thing that I'm focusing on is jobs, and jobs especially for young Canadians, because young Canadians right now, the unemployment rate is double the national average. It's about 14%. Yet at the same time, we're bringing in temporary foreign workers to fill jobs in Canada when Canadians are unemployed. And also thousands of jobs every year go unfilled because we don't have the proper skilled people to fill those jobs. So we have to break down that historic barrier between educators and the labor force to make sure that educators are training the skills necessary in the labor market. Now, I lived in Switzerland, and I saw firsthand an apprenticeship program that works really well, where the vast majority of the young Swiss go directly into a business or into a trade. They don't necessarily go to university. In fact, only a minority goes to university. So the students are learning the skills that are necessary in the marketplace. The students are happy because they're getting paid to learn. The businesses are happy because they're training the skills required in their industry. And the government's happy because the private sector is looking after most of the training. So it's a win-win-win. And as Prime Minister, I will introduce an apprenticeship program here in Canada to help get young people that first job and get them into these careers. And I'm not just talking about trades. I'm talking about good, high-paying professions like banking, insurance, pharmaceuticals, just to name a few.
I think that's a really good idea, because I think one thing we're seeing now, and I don't mean this in any way to diminish a university education, but there seems to be more demand in jobs that actually don't require necessarily a university degree, especially in Western Canada where we're very resource-based. I think we are actually seeing a huge shortfall in trades jobs itself. So would that still be a big focus of that apprenticeship program?
Oh, absolutely. What it is designed to do is to give young people the choice. They can still go to university or they can choose an apprenticeship. In my generation, we were told you had to get a university degree, otherwise you're not employable. Well, many people today are graduating with degrees. They have student debt, and they still can't get a job because they don't have the skills that are required in the marketplace. So we have to start training with the skills that are actually required so that Canadians can get those jobs, so we can bring down the unemployment rate, especially amongst young Canadians.
So, Andrew, one of the things I think that differentiates you as well is that you have a lot of experience in the private sector as well as in government. Right now, we're seeing a possible change in attitude down south with Donald Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress towards making the United States an extremely business-friendly environment. What fears do you have among what the Liberals are doing as far as not reacting to this? And what would you do, say, come 2019, if we see the Trump administration and the American economy and possibly in full swing and possibly that brain drain of the 1990s return? How would you equalize things for this country and ensure that international investment, trade come to Canada, not choosing the United States over Canada?
Well, first of all, Trump has already said he's going to lower corporate rates down to 15%. So we've got to keep our taxes low. Otherwise, businesses are going to pack up and leave. We did have low taxes under the previous Conservative government. In fact, they were the lowest taxes in over 50 years. And it wasn't at the cost of transfers to the provinces, because those actually went up by about 70% during the same time. So this is not the time to be raising taxes. And it's certainly not the time to be introducing a carbon tax. I think that is totally irresponsible. It's not going to help lower emissions. All it's going to do is transfer those emissions to the United States as producers pack up and leave and take tens of thousands of jobs with them. If we're going to deal with climate change, we need to do it on a North American scale, not on a Canadian scale, because we only represent about 1.6% of emissions. So we've got to keep taxes low. Look what happens in Ontario. Look, over the last number of years, they've got the highest energy costs in North America. Businesses are packing up and leaving because a lot of businesses are energy intensive and they can't afford to pay those bills. That's exactly what's going to happen nationally if we have a national carbon tax. We simply can't afford to have that right now.
2 more questions for you. First, let's completely shift gears. China, you spent some time over there, is that correct? Yes. So I wonder what your position is on a free trade deal with China. I'm a bit skeptical of that. I know Maxime Bernier said he wants it. Where do you stand on that? And is it possible to have true free trade with a controlled economy like China?
I would not rush into a free trade agreement with China. I would go into free trade agreements with other countries, though, like the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. Those are economies that are similar to ours. They have similar labor laws that we have. It's a much easier opportunity to do a free trade deal with a country that's similar to yours than like you said, a centrally governed economy like China, where a lot of it is run by the government or by the military. I would not rush into a free trade agreement. It is important that we did put in place a protection agreement with China, because we do have Canadian businesses doing business there, and China is our number 2 trading partner right now. But having said that, there's a long time before we would go into a free trade deal.
That's good to hear, at least from my perspective. Last thing is, I know you're focused on winning, and I really hope that our BC voters out there will, in the ranked ballot, if they're not putting you number 1, they'll at least put you number 2. A little bit of a homer here, called for the BC vote to stay loyal. But would you plan to run again either way, if you win or you lose? And because I think we'd be honestly really lucky to have you as our finance minister next caucus, should you not be the prime minister. And would you run here in North Van again?
Well, this is my home. I was born in North Vancouver, and I represented North Vancouver for 7 years. And so, yes, absolutely, I'm a team player. Obviously, I want to win. I'm running to win. I've worked with most of the other candidates, and we can still work together regardless of who wins. My opinion is that Canada needs more British Columbia, because British Columbia has the strongest economy, the best unemployment, the lowest unemployment, and a balanced budget right now. So I think that would be terrific. We need more of that in Ottawa, and less of the Gerald Butts, who came from Ontario and did those wonderful things to Ontario, which is now a have-not province as a result of that, and he's the one advising Trudeau right now. So we need to get our fiscal house in order. That's what Canadians want. That's what I'm hearing on the doorsteps for the last number of months. Conservatives are known to be strong fiscal managers. We need to stick to that in the next election so that we can win.
Andrew Saxton, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Thanks very much for watching. Rebel Media is your home for everything CPC leadership, so make sure you never miss a video. Click subscribe on our YouTube channel.